Chinese President Xi Jinping now in Ecuador on his way to Peru. He's been talking about strategic partnership with Ecuador. This is only one of those countries in Latin America China is working closely with. So how should we understand China's overall approach at this stage to Latin American countries?
You know that in the past, actually, China and Latin America, we are the old friend. At that time, China, Asia, Latin America, Africa, all of those countries, they said that we are friends. But today, China and Latin America becomes a strategic partnership. That's because even if there is a long distance between China and Latin America, but if you look at our economic ties becomes closer and closer.
Right.
Also, you can find that in the global governance, actually, as a developing economies, both China and the Latin America countries, we have our common interest in. So, especially in recent years, trade investment and other corporations,
right,
becomes more and more.
So we want to share a number with our audience over there. China is now Latin America's second largest trading partner and also the third largest source of investment, while Latin America is China's seventh largest trading partner. So there's a lot of ties being established over there. In Peru, right now, for us, we have Mr. Farnsworth coming from the U.S. originally. So when you're there, sir, do you feel the excitement that the Latin American countries have about the Chinese president's visit to that region? What do they expect to establish, and how would they compare their relations with China, if we can, their relations with their neighbor, the United States, for example, where you're originally from?
Well, thank you for having me on again. It's a great joy to be with you. And I would agree with you that the presence shortly of Xi Jinping to Lima is very, very anticipated by not just the Peruvians, but by many Latin Americans. The commitment that China has shown to Latin America, I think, is very strong over the last several years, and it seems to be sustained and indeed growing. So I agree with your assessment that it is a very strong and growing relationship. In terms of the relationship with the United States, I think Latin Americans don't necessarily say one or the other, they say both. I think there's room for a lot of investment in Latin America, there's room for a lot of cooperation, and Latin Americans at some level want to gain the best from both China and from the United States. So I think there's potentially a growing partnership there. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time.
That's probably, we can go to Mr. Tang in Brazil for us. Mr. Tang, what do you make of Mr. Farnsworth's assessment? Meanwhile, we understand there has been somewhat tension between the United States and Latin American neighbors as a result of President-elect Donald Trump's recent rhetorical campaign, even though we do not know the policy yet. So what do you think at this moment, Latin America's approach to the United States and its understanding of relations nature with China?
Well, China has developed a very, very strong partnership with most of the countries of Latin America and Caribbean. So much so that, as in my last article, I said that America's backyard is really growing a very robust Chinese garden. And with the election of President-elect Mr. Donald Trump, and where he vows to scrap the TPP, the only game left in town will be the RCEP and the
FTAAP,
Free Trade Area of Asia Pacific, which will be the only game in town. And I think that China will have a very, very significant leading role in this FTAAP. And President Xi Jinping's presence in Peru, of course, will ensure that China will play a major role. And I agree with Eric, whereby most Latin American countries need China because China is the one who's investing and creating and developing new relationships and alliances of mutual interest.
All right.
But most countries don't necessarily discard the United States.
Of course not. That's not smart, right? You need to have all kinds of ties as much as possible to develop your economy. Ms. Magowan, your assessment here, this time TTP seemed to be dead, at least a phrase like TPP seems to be that the continent could still be alive in one sort or the other. But then what would be the platform in which the United States could include many of its Latin American countries and neighbors? And meanwhile, will APEC, this platform, will FTAAP, RCEP be the possibility platform for Latin American countries? Ms. Magowan.
I think there are many good news here. First, I think China should take advantage of the high levels of trust from Latin American countries on the Chinese government, Chinese businessmen, and investment. I think that will benefit both areas. And the TPP, I think Mr. President-elect Trump has been a little bit misunderstood and is being shown as a protectionist. I don't think that's what he really meant. Mm-hmm. He meant of engaging in smart trade agreements. He never said we are not going to get into agreements anymore. I agree with the TPP. I don't think it's going to happen. However, I think the United States is going to continue having trade deals with China and with Latin America. And Latin America will benefit greatly, but there's one thing that Latin America needs to do that hasn't been done in decades. Right. They keep exporting primarily goods that are primary goods, the no value added, and they need to work harder in doing that. And the second thing that they need to work harder is in the image, their image that there are high levels of corruption. People don't want to invest, China included, in regions that are known for having high level of corruption. And we can see the example of Uruguay, for example. Uruguay is being seen of no corruption or very low levels of corruption. And there are great foreign investments in Uruguay, and they are doing very well. The rest of the other Latin American countries should, follow that example.
Mr. Zhang, does China have a preference in terms of which country to invest in? How much would the social and political issues considered by Ms. Magowan in the Washington, D.C. be of concern to China?
So your point is, sorry.
The point is, does China agree with what some of the other countries have accused Latin American countries, the governments, of corruption? And is that a big concern for Chinese investment?
Yeah, of course, you know that now China's investment in Latin American countries is very important for their economic development, especially those Latin American countries now suffering from, financial support. And meanwhile, this type of, huge investments also can boom, trade between China and the Latin American countries. Of course, Latin American countries as developing economies, of course, some of corruption phenomena happened, but
in developing economies also, by the way.
So I think that, actually many developing economies, all of them have the same phenomenon. So I think this type of things need to be regulated by their domestic rules and regulations.
Having said that, let me ask you a further question about what we earlier discussed. These different kinds of trade mechanisms, TPP off now from the shelf, not necessarily going to happen. Then what is likely to be the platform? Is it going to be APEC, which the Chinese President Xi Jinping is going, or is it going to be some of the other mechanisms, FTAAP, RCEP, as Mr. Tang just earlier recommended, or some of the new platforms that China and Latin American countries can invent together, invent and invest together?
Actually, in short term, TPP maybe will be dead. But I don't think TPP will die forever because maybe TPP will have a long, complicated story. But for RCEP, I think that's belonging to 16 countries in East Asia region, and the Latin American countries didn't involved in that mega FTA. Given that in 2014, actually 21 members of APEC economies. Actually,
including 3 of the Latin American countries, Mexico, Peru, and there's another one.
Chile, Peru, Mexican actually belonging to members. And all of members agree that by 2025, there will be FTAAP. We will go forward to that goal. So that means I think that RCEP, at this stage, many people expected that RCEP can make consensus. Also, those RCEP members agreed that by the end of this year, there will be a basic agreement.
I see. So there is hope for RCEP.
Yeah, hope. In the future, I think that RCEP can play a role. Meanwhile, those bilateral free trade agreement, including bilateral free trade agreement between China and Chile, China, Peru, all of them will support.
I have to follow up a little bit, Mr. Zhang, because I understand you personally involved in the feasibility report about having this bilateral agreement between China and Chile, China, and also Peru, bilateral trade agreement. Tell me, what is China looking at specifically when bilateral platforms is being established? What is China really looking at? And how will that really benefit the local people? This is a deglobalization state that we're talking about. At least there's some words about that. So how is it likely to really benefit the people there? Briefly,
actually,
if you can, sir.
Actually, those two bilateral free trade agreements happened 10 years ago. At that time, both two countries actually, we realized that this bilateral free trade agreement will produce trade creation and investment creation, will create so a lot of job opportunities for two countries' people, as well as they can make their economic growth. Actually, we already benefit from that process.
Okay, Mr. Tang, over there in Brazil, not only these trade mechanisms, but also AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, that is likely to be another platform in which China can cooperate with Latin American countries. Some of them have already becoming observing countries, in fact, on its way to be the member.
Yeah, I think that the Chinese approach to the whole world, not only Latin America, has been very welcome because China is investing and trading and creating and building very necessary infrastructure to help develop the countries. Very much the same way China did in Africa. And Chinese engagement is a very welcome and viewed as a positive engagement. And although Brazil has suffered a big corruption scandal and most of the guilty leaders, political and business people, are in jail, China has been investing massively into Brazil. And this will certainly help Brazil lift itself out of its economic recession, and which is really what China is doing all over the world in helping these countries. Like the Road and Bridge Initiative will help 60 countries along the way and elsewhere to develop. And so it's very, very positive.
Not only these multilateral agreement and platform, but also some of the other mechanisms that China has not yet had the opportunity to tap in, and so hasn't the United States. Mr. Farnsworth, for example, Mercosur, which is an organization between Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, these are also trade platforms. How much thoughts do you think Washington should have about working on these platforms with the local people? How much does China and the United States, two biggest trading countries in the world, be able to tap into those possibilities?
Well, I think there's a great potential. Mercosur is an agreement which some would say needs to be reformed, both in terms of the partners. Venezuela is a member of Mercosur and is having some real troubles, as you know. But also Mercosur itself is more of an agreement to try to promote trade among the 4 or the 5 parties in it, rather than open to the rest of the world. And so there are probably some reforms that needed to take place there. But I think the broader point is one that's very important to make, which is to say we don't know what's going to happen. The best trade is the most efficient trade, which is trade that takes place among the most parties and is at the highest standard of level. So the WTO ultimately would be the best platform to utilize, but that doesn't seem to be a possibility right now. There is a lot of things going on in the Western Hemisphere, just as you've outlined. China's a part of that. The United States may or may not go forward with the TPP, et cetera. So we'll have to work that out. But I think we can't discount also the need for continued reform in Latin America itself.
Sure.
We have new governments in Brazil and Argentina. We have a newly elected president here in Peru, very pro-market, very welcome to foreign investment and to cooperation externally, and I think that's a very positive sign. So whether or not there's a formal trade agreement with one or more of these countries, I think we can understand that trade and investment nonetheless will continue forward, continue being an issue that brings our regions together, and I think that's a very positive thing.
It is a positive thing. We've also seen some positive signs of it from the Chinese side. President Xi's, this is already the third visit for him to Latin America, for him alone, since he took office in the year 2012. And also bilateral ties have developed rapidly over the past few years. Take a look at some of the numbers we have over there. 2013, he visited Trinidad and Tobago, Costa Rica, Mexico, pointing out that it was the period of opportunity for bilateral ties. 2014 to Brazil, President Xi once again to Argentina, Venezuela, and Cuba, where he pushed a comprehensive partnership between China and Latin America. This year to Ecuador, Peru, likely Chile later during his visit. Ms. Magowan, we've been talking many times about the changes going on between the United States and Cuba, but with a new president coming into the office, it seems that some of the earlier legacy is going to be written in a very different form. So, how much is really, do you think, this new administration ready to approach Latin America? How much opportunity can countries like China and other Asia-Pacific countries be able to, with the United States, cooperate on the Latin America issues, particular trade?
Well, I think, again, I think China has a great opportunity. When President of China, Xi Jinping, went to the last time in 2014, you had in Brazil, Argentina, Cuba, you had left-wing governments. Now these governments are right-wing, market-based. They are going to be considering trade with the United States too. That doesn't mean they are not going to stop trading with China. As I said, the level of trust is very high. Also, the problem with Mercosur, everybody knows, is Venezuela, and I am a believer that if there is a country that can help Venezuela in getting out of the funk that they are there, it's China. I think a little bit more of trust, high risk, I understand, from the part of China, but that could help Venezuela getting out of where they are in the terrible economic situation and political situation that they are.
Right.
And they could also benefit in many, many ways.
Okay, let me come to you finally, Mr. Zhang. The country like Cuba, Venezuela are unique in their own ways.
Yeah.
How is China likely to approach these countries? These are certainly not on Mr. President's visit this time, but certainly he made his stop earlier.
Yeah.
Secondly, you see China willing to do some of the wonderful projects in some of the countries, like the one between Brazil and Peru, interoceanic railway.
Yeah.
How much the chance does China have in working on these projects?
Yeah. The first thing is that now between China and the Latin American countries, we have our China-Latin America Forum. Actually, we already formulated our institutional cooperation platform on which every Latin American countries will be appreciated. Also, every country will be our friend. We need to promote our trade, investment, cooperation, financial cooperation.
You made that point very clearly already, sir. So finally, what about those projects?
Yeah, project is very huge engineering projects, and also there are so many difficulties. But you know that from Chinese side, we have our full chain supply capacity for infrastructure projects. We already get success story both in China and the other countries. So I do believe that China will have opportunities in Latin American countries.